This podcast is entertainment, not financial, tax, or legal advice. Views expressed represent statements of the speaker in their individual capacity, do not represent the views of Unchained, and should not be considered investment advice. Speakers often have personal, family, or business connections to Unchained, which may include direct financial benefits. Please see our disclosure at unchained.com/podcast.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Frontier. Today we're doing something a little different. This episode marks the beginning of a special series we're doing here at Unchained called The Last Free Americans. It's a deep dive into one of the most important questions of our time, whether the right to hold and control your money will remain protected in the digital age. Over the next few months, we'll explore the legal, cultural, and technological battles surrounding self-custody, talking with lawmakers, developers, human rights advocates, and historians about what is really at stake. But before we hear from the guests, we wanted to start with the person behind the project, Unchained co-founder and CEO Joe Kelly. Joe's been one of the clearest voices in the industry for years, building a company grounded in the principle that real ownership means holding your own keys. So today we're turning the microphone towards him to understand why the series exists, what inspired it, and why the idea of self-custody goes far beyond Bitcoin itself. Joe, you grew up in Alaska, the last frontier. How did that environment shape your sense of independence, and how does it influence the way you think about this new digital frontier we're exploring with Bitcoin?
Well, yeah, I'd say actually it was personally kind of my return to Alaska as an adult that really made these things dawn on me. Growing up in a place, you don't always necessarily know what's different. And I had the opportunity to do a lot of traveling as a teenager with my family, and got to experience other cultures. And we lived out on a boat actually for a couple of years. And that was really and this was early, before a lot of people were putting solar panels in their houses. People had solar panels on their boat. They had wind generators on their boat. You had this kind of self-sufficiency. You had to drive for yourself. It was imperative. It was part of survival. So that really fostered some of that sense of independence. And then, in reflecting more as an adult, when you recognize what was driving your parents to move to Alaska, what was the thing that was calling them in the 70s or 80s, when there was much more of a population boom up there of incoming folks from the lower 48, so those kinds of seeds of things were there. And then only in recent times and going back in the last few years to visit family and recognizing what a beautiful state it is, how nice it is to have such pristine wilderness that's there. And you're recognizing facts like 67% of the land area of protected wilderness in the United States is in Alaska. So there's kind of this preservation mentality around preserving natural wilderness. And so kind of recognizing that, thinking about the connections between different frontiers. There's a kind of a literal physical frontier of Alaska. It's also its state motto, as you expressed. And I feel like in Bitcoin and the journey with Unchained has been working out in this frontier of a new asset, of a new monetary medium. And so the parallels there have just been a really rich source of both analogy and insight, I think, for the path ahead.
Man. Yeah, I feel like I need to make a trip up to Alaska at some point. So you co-founded Unchained nearly a decade ago, long before most people were even knew what self-custody was. What experiences or convictions led you to build a company around this principle, and how does this series connect to that life's work?
Yeah, I think for folks getting into Bitcoin, it's often done in a way that is most comfortable at first, something that many of us have experienced as maybe an investor holding dollars in a checking account, and then you might have the experience of purchasing securities, stocks and bonds, say, in a brokerage account. And so it's that account-based experience that usually is the medium we enter into, owning Bitcoin for the first time. But then I'd say it's almost like a catechism for me, like in the analogy of with going through, learning about a religion, say Christianity, and your experience when you have a hardware wallet that you understand is distinctively, not connected to the internet. And then you plug it in and you conduct a transaction. You move Bitcoin from you to a friend or one wallet to another, and you recognize that there was no intermediary in that transfer. That's I think the big aha. That's really the thing that when I'm talking to somebody, especially a policymaker or even a potential client for Unchained, understanding if they've ever used Arbor Wallet, that yes, no, I find is one of the biggest points of distinction in terms of, does somebody really understand what's going on? Do they really understand the promise of this technology and what it does away with in terms of a financial system just clogged with intermediaries, and why Bitcoin is so unique.
Yeah, and just to go down that path a little bit forward, a little bit more, um, you know, this experience, it's not just a principle. Like, what happens in that moment of like first sending Bitcoin yourself that like changes how people see money?
Gosh, it's just this aha. It's like we can experience transfer, passing you a $20 bill in a transaction, and knowing that was kind of fundamentally private, or that was kind of between us. We know that there's very little to no fees or anything that's kind of on top of that transaction, or there's no merchant banking, or kind of merchant services like a credit card provider has to provide, and things like that. So it's just very simple. It's very very rooted, feels very natural. And then you don't realize necessarily we're all so accustomed to using a credit card for most of our transactions in the United States, especially. Maybe a debit card, but still same thing. There's a terminal, there's this card. You don't experience as a consumer, but there are fees for the merchant, when that happens. And it's certainly not private. The credit card transactions are passed through at least 2 or 3 other systems or banks or financial services companies. And so that experience, it's kind of a way it sneaks up on you. You don't know it's necessarily the water you're swimming in. Like the young fish turns to the old fish, or they're like, what's water? Kind of a thing like that. That's the state of us, especially in the U.S. in our financial system. We don't recognize the water we're in, and necessarily how clouded or polluted it is by these intermediaries. And so something like transferring Bitcoin electronically kind of resets that digital experience into this context of just a peer-to-peer transaction.
Exactly. Oh man. Yeah, no, that light bulb moment is pretty special when it happens, for sure. So it's nice that you kind of are pushing that for people to experience themselves. To come back to the frontier and this parallel that you've drawn between wilderness conservation and the protection of financial freedom. How did that analogy come to you, and what does it reveal about the way you see Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it was in part thinking about the phenomena of frontiers, and what it is when some new resource or some new landscape, or country that was previously, say, unsettled, and we find gold there, we find some natural resource, or just there's overpopulation somewhere, so people are setting out to this frontier. That there's kind of these phases we seem to go through as societies. And I've loved, for instance, shows like Deadwood, which if you haven't seen is a great show, had a good run on HBO. And that show, as the writers talk about, was really, it could have been taken place anywhere. That their original insight actually was that they were going to do it in Rome, or like talk about be set in kind of Roman times and early Roman Empire era. But HBO already had a show, Rome, at the time. So the writers scrapped that setting and made the setting, the kind of frontier west of the United States. So like Montana, Wyoming, those kinds of regions where in the kind of 1800s, new settlers were coming in. And you watch throughout the show, it's kind of this early phase of the gold prospectors, also the saloons and the innkeepers that serve them. And then kind of later, then the lawman shows up. That's one of the central themes throughout the couple seasons there. And then finally, kind of more like business and political interests that sort of gather power, or use outside power to cause influence in that local scene. So there's a really important theme, or kind of like a deep story about civilization and people and settling something new. And you can also see it not just in the land environment, but also in markets or around maybe a new asset. And so those parallels are strong, and it's a rich analogy, because you can watch how Alaska went through that, as there was was once Seward's Folly. You're like, what do we need all this land for? And then we start to discover there's gold in them there hills. There's now we know there's a lot oil and gas and a lot of other minerals in the state of Alaska. So as those were found, then there's that rush in again of the same prospectors, the service providers, the innkeepers, and whatnot for them, people selling picks and shovels, as it were, and then later, the business interests, law, politics, things like that start to enter. So these phases of something that is new and newly settled, and then Bitcoin has that. I think it's just a common way we see it at Unchained, insofar as its first almost 10 years was kind of this very frontier era. It looked like a lot of the ruffians, the prospectors, the miners, somewhat literally, and then you have this gold rush where there's a lot of excess, the con men and the types of games that are run to relieve people of their gold and those kinds of things, or their Bitcoin. Those kind of reach a peak or get pretty crazy and wild, and then there's some like integration that happens after that gold rush, and so that after it's kind of become a mainstream thing or mainstream idea. Newspapers are writing about it, and then later that integration is kind of reconciling the early values, or early principles, or the things that were there in the frontier with now the needs of society. And I think so if that's kind of the template for these things and how they evolve through time, I think then there's when thinking about those frontier values, what I saw in the conservation movement, and there's really great works about this. I recommend like the Ken Burns documentary called America's National Parks, America's Best Idea, and it really is kind of a uniquely American thing. We've really kind of pioneered this concept as a society or a government that's going to set aside land for wilderness and to preserve it from civilization. And it was activists and writers and even almost like kind of spiritualists, like a John Muir and others through the late 19th century, early 20th century, who were really thinking about this and advocating for this, really on that level of almost like spiritualism and a very kind of human, timeless cause. Looking at, okay, civilization, it's here to stay. It's steamrolling. It's going. What is involved? It involves paving things over with concrete. It involves big machines. It involves pollution. It involves noise. It involves all these things that sort of really encroach. And these are all conveniences. They're great advancements for society and humans. A great uplifting thing. The industrialization of society has led to. At the same time, what John Muir was kind of seeing is that, like, well, maybe what is lost, or what is this incentive? What is this drive sort of maybe obfuscating from us in terms of a state of nature, a natural way of being, moments of peace, and something that's kind of there in nature, and when you're walking through the woods. So he was seeing that. He was seeing how these wonders of nature can kind of really register with the person on a real heart and soul level, and that's what he was speaking to, and that's what in the walks he would lead through woods, this is what that he would kind of bring other people into seeing themselves, and so that got people to see that, hey, there's something important here. Hey, let's not lose sight of this in our quest for creating great cities, creating great human works. Let's acknowledge, say, what God or Mother Nature has kind of built and wrought here on Earth, and not lose that, not let our children not be able to experience those things as well. So it kind of became this fight, this real charge that he undertook, and was able to build some supporters around and build like kind of this movement around conservation. And luckily there was a president, say like Teddy Roosevelt, and then there was like subsequent events and subsequent things that happened at kind of a political level that helped make it happen, such that we then marked out these monuments, we marked out these forests, we marked out these places of wilderness that would remain pristine and be accessible for more and more people, and especially future generations to get to benefit from the great just natural wonders we have benefit of here in the U.S.
Yeah, and it seems like people appreciate it across the political spectrum. It's one of the few things that has that kind of support. And along the lines of that kind of like American pride, I'm curious, from the series title, The Last Free Americans, like it carries pride, but it also carries a little bit of a warning, I would say.
Yeah.
Who are the last free Americans, and what does this phrase mean to you personally?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting phrase because it's provocative. I think first is really kind of what it's meant to do. Of like, really kind of to grab attention. I think fortunately, I don't want to be, I don't want to be construed as overly alarmist. Say that we're gonna lose these rights to self custody tomorrow. But I think what the message is there in both like a conservation movement sense and these other things of, hey, there's something that's steamrolling here. There's something that's got like a compounding effect. And if we don't either intervene or ring fence something really important off from it, that then there's something really important thing that's a little bit of an ineffable quality or like a little bit of a thing that doesn't necessarily have a explicit dollar value or a cost benefit analysis kind of a thing to it, that we lose that important thing. So that's the last free Americans is to pose that challenge of, are we going to allow it such that we are, our generation and maybe the kids around today are the last free Americans in terms of those who can hold and transact with their own money in a peer-to-peer context. So that's really what the title is getting at.
Gotcha. And this miniseries has the ability, has the legs to stand on its own. But why does this project belong under the Unchained banner? Like, what responsibility do you think a company like Unchained has shaping this conversation?
Yeah, I think Unchained itself, I viewed as always a company with a lot of spirit and, on something like a quest of we weren't, myself and my co-founder weren't bankers before this. We weren't working in financial services. We came to this new and with fresh eyes and really from a Bitcoin first perspective. And so once you've adopted the view that Bitcoin is here to stay, once you've sort of made that commitment first, then there are certain principles or certain next steps you're drawn to in terms of what is the right way to build a company, what is the right way to build a service or suite of financial services around Bitcoin. And I've talked about this in other contexts, but it's sort of like, it's almost a different evolutionary tree for this type of service, that the kind of evolutionary tree that's there in TradFi, or call it just really fiat-based financial services. It has this kind of very different root. It's almost like a different species that involves the source of money coming from central banks, coming from sovereign governments, and those are people controlled. Those have these layers of intermediaries naturally. Those have aspects of privilege in terms of who quote, gets the money first, and that is not those are not the roots that Bitcoin is planted in. Those are not the roots we're gifted with Bitcoin. And so building this kind of new life form, as it were, of a financial services company on the bedrock of Bitcoin and those assumptions, that involves a different way of doing things. That's how we've gotten to things like collaborative custody that really underpin all the financial products we service. And it's that kind of evolutionary path that I feel like we're on, and it's part discovery, part invention, kind of a process. I feel like if we weren't building Unchained, someone else would have to, because I think a lot of Bitcoiners share that view of once your glasses are orange, once you see the world through an orange lens like this, then you're like, yeah, this is the way you would do it. This should exist. This should be the thing that is naturally derived from a Bitcoin native mindset and a Bitcoin native market.
Yeah, it's like Unchained is a new age financial services, but there are also products out there that are tapping into what people are already familiar with. So you have like the Bitcoin ETF, which has been like the most successful ETF launch in history, drawing hundreds of $1 billion over a couple of years. And for many, they look at that as validation. But what role do you think the ETF plays? And do you think many of these people will eventually come around to understanding and appreciating key control?
Yeah. ETF is a wonderful bridge, and it's a great access point. And for all the flaws of the fiat system, say, things like buying securities, holding securities in a brokerage account, getting loans against those securities, trusting the safekeeping of those securities, that all works pretty well. So at least to kind of piggyback or hitch on to that behavior, that there's comfort level that a lot of investors already have with that kind of medium. It's great. Definitely great top of funnel, great awareness building for Bitcoin. Bitcoin still is a peer-to-peer money, and there's not really any way you're necessarily transferring an ETF peer-to-peer with each other. There's not any way you're necessarily accessing that aha moment. So it's sort of like, I don't know, visiting the wilderness, but like by helicopter, or like, or just kind of getting a different view of the asset versus kind of experiencing it. So yeah, we certainly celebrate it. We think it's a great evolution of things, but not as necessarily as core for Bitcoin in terms of growth of that like core experience.
Yeah, and for getting people to appreciate that wilderness, the conservation movement had figures like John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt who made the abstract ideals tangible to the public. Who plays that role in the fight for self-custody today?
Yeah, I think it's because I think this is where the analogy is also quite strong. It's experiential. It's kind of one thing to hear John Muir talk or read his books and hear he's gonna be very eloquent to talk about these spiritual moments or these moments in the wilderness. And maybe that captivates you somewhat. But given also what we're talking about is in the exchange of value, it's an economic concept. Economics, reading about it can be boring to a lot of people. But you don't know what you don't know until you experience it. You may not appreciate wilderness until you go see a mountain, or go, you watch a bear family, trudge across a river from 300 yards away, or like you're kind of just like, wow, this is real, this is intense. There's a feeling here that your core is activated. You're in a moment that you find truly special. So I think that's the thing that, with if all everybody did here on out, which is buy ETFs, we wouldn't have that experience. It would be like, yeah, because this is all we had was like, our sense of nature was just visiting Central Park or something like this. Or, it's just like, okay, it's still somewhat man-made, it's curated, it's nice, it's a place I can go jog or watch a swan, but you may not get that same experience of seeing like just some of the great things that are in national parks. So I think companies like Unchained and just the whole ecosystem that's evolved around, whether it's hardware wallets, Ledger, Trezor, Coldcard, foundation devices, that there's a lot of great companies that advance the state of the art and really make the experience around using cryptography and keys more easy. That's kind of, yeah, that's the way you're easing people into, like giving them equipment to go into the wild, go experience the wilderness, but also feel safe or feel like they have tools that can protect them and make that not so treacherous of a journey. And so, yeah, I think just companies that make it an option that you can go visit the wild, you can go visit and live in a self-custody format, and then not lose everything or not feel like you're just naked out there and you got to go hunt your own meat and stuff like that. Like we're building the equipment that lets you be there and have still the things you need to get along, just survive.
Love that analogy. Yeah. And there are multiple fronts of this battle for conservation, especially with the Bitcoin wilderness. And the Clarity Act is like on the immediate policy front, but is there a deeper cultural and moral shift that you hope to bring to light with this series beyond the bill itself?
Yeah, I think that's something that's a point in time, something that's actionable, right? And I think this is where the comment and some of the nuance lies, insofar as it's a rare person who would argue to say self-custody is, say, like under direct threat, or if they're trying to ban it. They did try. There was a Mnuchin rule in late 2020 that was in effect an attempt to ban it. Some of the bills that have been proposed by Elizabeth Warren around digital assets also veer kind of into that territory. So there's that risk of like, a type of attack like that coming. But necessarily, nothing on the books today is the type of thing that like says we should feel in danger. So, but what's at stake and what is included in the drafts of the Clarity Act, and it's had different names, or between market structure bill and these kinds of things. But the key point is that in the Senate, in their deliberations around these bills for digital assets or cryptocurrency, there is language that is meant to basically prohibit any regulatory agency or any regulator from encroaching on these rights, or like that thou shall not institute laws or rules or policies that prevent Americans from holding their own keys. Is essentially how it reads. And so that's just a great, that's like a proactive defense against this kind of a thing, getting that kind of a law on the books, where there's a lot more, I think, activity and alarm is also in the developer protections. Now that we have seen some cases and some prosecutions that went through around the development of services that other people use and may use for nefarious purposes, money laundering or other things. And so, but really protecting the idea that the developers of that aren't the ones that are at fault for making a tool available that someone might have chosen to use for illegal purposes. So, and that is kind of more of a hallmark, or say this generation's version of the fight 30 years ago around cryptography, and where there was a real movement to potentially ban cryptography and its private use, kind of a thing. So luckily we got through that type of battle. I think that like America set really the standard for that. And there's a way, this is all a very American kind of fight, and that we're unique as a country in our embrace of free speech, and the idea that code or writing code could be considered speech. The idea that maintaining a node or participating in Bitcoin in a peer-to-peer way might be your own kind of version of speech, people might say. So that all that's kind of rooted in what America gets to do here, and I'm very prideful of that. And I think a lot of other people are too, and recognize that that's something going on in this country that is what helps make it great.
Yeah, and it seems like you can't just expect, all right, people can go live on the wilderness on their own. We want to be able to have this be codified. Like, this is part of the journey of like making it so people can be more free, not in the wilderness as well. So what do you say to the person who themselves doesn't really appreciate the idea of direct control over their money, especially this moment of like regulatory peacetime, and people already forgetting the lessons learned by like an FTX collapse and SVB collapse and things like that?
Yeah. Well, as we've talked about, I think the experience of it's important. So giving them the accessibility to have the experience, services like Unchained that can guide people through their initial questions or their concerns with just trying it, just having that experience first, and getting to that aha. And then, yeah, man, if we do have, your memories can be short-lived. At the same time, it's inevitable that there will be more SVBs. There will be more Canadian trucker protests, or there will be these kinds of other instances that people recognize how much the financial system they depend on is controlled by intermediaries, and their money is quote not quite always directly theirs. And so it's those are shakeups. Those are things that really do bring people to understand what counterparty risk means, and look for ways to eliminate that from like their life savings or their family's nest egg.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I want to make sure I give you time to, if there's anything else you'd like to bring up about this series before we wrap it up. I'm really looking forward to watching it myself, but wanted to make sure that you are able to let people know what to expect beyond what we've talked about already.
No, other than just that, I mean, it's been really fun. I think for me, part of what drew me to Bitcoin is the kind of intellectual adventure it offers, to really try to understand it. I think it's people are initially confused or feel like, I don't get Bitcoin, I don't get these things, but go try and understand the dollar banking system. Go try and understand what happens in a credit card transaction. And I think just, applying models from biology, evolution, these things to these different contexts to really see how we've evolved a kind of a Frankenstein, or how there's just all these different marginal incentives for firms to be lending or borrowing, or in kind of all these inherent ways that risk gets created in the system. And so I think finding our way back to this state of nature, and I'm borrowing that phrase because he was so good at it. But Congressman Warren Davidson is worth kind of shouting out by name because he was the original proposer for the Keep Your Coins Act, kind of a play on KYC, but that is something he pushed through into the bill that passed through Congress version of the Clarity Act recently this year. So in a speech he used the word the state of nature idea of like transacting with each other, and just that there's a lot of foundational things surrounding this in terms of our original Constitution in the United States, pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. And that was actually tweaked because the earlier versions of that read more like pursuit of property, not just happiness. And so the right to acquire, hold, and transact with your property privately is it's just, again, something that's very much there in the beginning. It's inarguable that I think a lot of the early founding fathers of our great country would have loved Bitcoin, but would totally embraced it, been all over it. And so just I think that remembrance for us as a society that's really the roots of where we came from. That's really the roots of this country is important. And gosh, yeah, I think then the only other thing is just that there are a lot of great advocates out there already. There's a lot of great prior art that I feel like I'm kind of in some ways just a student of, or just a great fan trying to assemble the interviews and the people that have spoken up about this. There's also great regulators, folks like Commissioner Peirce at the SEC. Her speech from the other month or two ago about I think it was something about watermelons, where it was like the part of the talk title, but talking about financial privacy. Like here's a regulator at a conference. They're her views, not the views of her of the SEC, but really taking seriously the idea that like do 8 different parties need to know that I bought coffee this morning? It's like, what happened there? How do we get to that point? And so, yeah, I think that Bitcoin itself is not quite private, or like it does that. There's a public blockchain there of any record of transactions we make, but there's still something we're kind of getting back to as a movement when we embrace Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer transaction network.
Beautiful. Well, Joe, thank you for taking the time to share the story behind the project and why it matters, not just for Bitcoin, but for the broader idea of freedom itself. We're looking forward to hearing this conversation that you'll be leading next. So everyone else, make sure you stay tuned for this very important mini-series from Unchained, The Last Free Americans, coming soon right here on the Bitcoin Frontier podcast feed. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Timo.